Welcome to my video about the middle game plans in the Scotch Gambit modern attack, my Chessable course. As you know, there are basically two plans. One is associated with the outpost c5 and having a bind on the dark squares, and the other one is a kingside attack supported by a pawn on e5 and then an advance with the pawn f2, f4, f5 and f6. So today I'm going to focus on the plan associated with the square c5. I think for a lot of club players it's unclear if you have a bind on the dark squares, how to exploit that and how to further your advantage. So we're going to look at a game that was played this year, April 21st, between Anita Gara, international master, and Boklarka Erdős in the Hungarian team championships. And I've chosen this game because they have chosen for the starting moves all the moves that are most frequently played on Lichess in Rapid and Classical. So let's get into it. So e4, e5, d4, so now we are having our signature move, e5, d5, bishop d7. I'm not going into any other details, and bishop c5. So this is, you could say, kind of the starting position. And white is going to kick the knight with f3. The knight goes away. We play bishop e3. And now, of course, there are two moves. And I quickly want to take a detour because there are two continuations here. There is castle short and there is bishop e6. We're going to focus on castle short, which is the most played move at club player level. But bishop b6 is more played at grandmaster level. It's like 45% bishop e6 and 35% castle short. And I'd like you to show you just an idea, right? So when we look at the position, this is called the main position of the modern attack. Black's light squared bishop has no counterpart and is very dangerous. So in this position, I'd like you to look at the following plan. I had this in two games, castle short, bishop h4, attacking the queen on d8. And now most frequently played is queen c8. a4, threatening to trap the bishop on b6 with a5. So black plays a5, and now the question is the bishop on b6 very bad, or can it become dangerous? It will become dangerous if black can advance their pawns with, of course, with c4 and d3. And now I would like you to show the plan. And Graham Jones in his Coffee House Repertoire 2 pays a lot of attention to this move idea, which is h3, king h2 and g4. So the idea, so this is the first, right, is of course this is associated with limiting the scope of the bishop on d7. Then to advance g4 to support the advance of the pawn to f5. Sometimes we can play f5 without the support of the pawn g4, but normally we need support by h3 and g4. So the idea is h3, king h2. The idea of king h2 is to get the king out of any discovered attacks after c4, d3, and then after h3, g4, f5, followed by f6. I had this two times, and I just would like you to show what happened. So the first one was against another master, entitled Tuesday. And this is not the main dish, of course, and the game was over. And then I had one game on board one of the Lichess 45-45 league. So this is a serious game with 45 minutes plus 45 seconds per move. And in that game, bishop e6 was played, king h2 again. And also here, game was over before 25 moves. So remember the idea of h3, king h2, g4, with the idea to advance f5 and have a kingside attack. And now we go back to the game, because in the game black didn't play bishop e6 and delayed the castling, but played castling immediately. And we go into this position, right? And after queen e7, a lot of players play queen c3 here. And it's, if you have watched my 10 most common mistakes, you know that you have to play here rook a e1, because, just as a reminder, after queen c3, black has the move f6, and we can play bishop c5. But this is nothing special. So what's the difference with rook a e1? Like white played, after f6, we play e6 with the idea bishop takes e6, bishop takes b6, a takes b6, f5, taking advantage of the pin over the e-file. So queen e7, very important to play rook a to e1 and not queen c3. And this was played in the game. And now the most common move on Lichess, we're still following the Lichess Rapid and Classical database for the most common moves, because this is what you will get as a club player, is bishop f5. So, of course, the idea probably by black is, I have a light squared bishop and there's no counterpart on the white side, and I'm going to activate this bishop, put pressure on c2, perhaps put it on e4, and then I can bring my queen and put pressure on g2. But the main thing is, of course, is to activate the bishop to a more active square than d7. But what is the disadvantage? Of course, when we look at this position, the pawn on c6 is no longer defended. And what is white's next move? Queen c3 to attack it. And again, what is the most commonly played move on Lichess? Queen d7 to defend that pawn. Right? And now we play bishop c5, and this now we enter the territory where we can say that we have a dark square bind on the queen side. We control the square c5, and but the question is, how are we going to make anything of this? Again, most played move is rook b8 here. Black is playing there a rook to the half open file. And now you can see what the white player is doing, h3. So, because we looked at the other line, we know, of course, what the intent is. The intent is to play king h2, perhaps play g4, and have an attack on the king side. But mostly, of course, it restricts also this bishop. It restricts the queen. The queen can no longer go to g4. And very important to notice is that when you talk about static versus dynamic advantages, this outpost on c5 that cannot be challenged by a pawn, by a black pawn, is like an advantage that will stay. So it's like a static advantage. So white is not in a hurry to exploit their advantage and can take her time. Black played h5, and there we have king h2. So all in line with what Graham Jones is saying in his book, Coffee House Repertoire, what I showed in my games, where I won quickly 2 games. Now this king is no longer under attack by the bishop on b6 indirectly, so we're threatening to take the rook on f8 because we're out of the pin. The bishop on c5 is no longer pinned, so rook e8 and now a4, right? And after a4 we are threatening, for instance, a5, and then black is forced to exchange the bishop on c5 because and a5 is not possible in this case because knight takes a5 would just win a pawn. So let's see. Black plays queen e6, just would like to bring her queen to a more active square. We could already play here a move like knight e4. But like I said, white has a static advantage, is not in a hurry. And white is thinking, if I play knight d4 in this position, black will play queen g6, attacking the pawn on c2. So I can win a pawn on c6, but my pawn on c2 is also under attack. So let me play a move to anticipate the defense queen g6, which is rook e3, with the idea that after knight d4 we can follow up with rook g3. So this is like a prophylactic move, anticipating queen g6 and with the idea of playing rook g3 after queen g6. And suddenly we see that the queen on c3 is looking to g7, the rook is looking to g7, and with a knight coming to d4 we're putting pressure on the bishop on f5 and the pawn on c6. So instead of playing knight d4, queen g6 directly, white decided to play the best move after queen g6, which is rook e3. So black plays h4 to prevent that idea of rook g3. And now you can see white is just taking her time and protecting c2 one more time. So there are all kind of good moves, of course, a5, knight d4, but white is saying, I have a static advantage, I'm not in a hurry, I'm going to activate my rooks, prepare a rook lift, I'm going to overprotect the pawn on c2 because my advantage is not going away and knight d4 is coming. And so queen h6, black is trying to create a little bit of counterplay, b3, so the rook has no future staring down the b file, queen g6, and now it's time to execute f6, knight takes e6, f takes e5, f takes e5, d4, rook takes e4, knight takes b8, and suddenly when we look at this position, white exchanges into a winning rook ending that she converted without any issues. So I hope this was useful for you to get a feel for the middle game plan and how to exploit this dark squared bind by having full control over c5. We saw that the move a4, a5, which is typical to force the bishop on b6 to take on c5, and then we take back. And we saw, of course, also that the weakness of the pawn on c6, and we saw this idea of h3, king h2, threatening g4. And also what we noticed is that we have a static advantage, so white was not in a hurry, brought her rooks to the third and the second rank, overprotected c2, made sure that b2 was not a weakness by playing b3, and won a beautiful game. Thank you, and I hope this will help you in understanding the Scotch Gambit Chessable course better.